Hello students, today we're going to start talking a little bit through chapter 6, which covers methods and event handlers, and I'm going to use as a starting point this future value application that I ended when I did the loops program, or I guess the future value program, but when we were working with loops. Excuse me. So let me comment out some of these random integers down here I was looping through. I need to remember the shortcut for commenting out. Control K, Control C. So I can stop going out of full screen just to comment stuff out. Okay, let's move this up with the relevant code. Also, another thing you can do in Visual Studio if you're kind of overwhelmed with how much code you have on the screen, which is actually pretty neat. So we have all of this, but I kind of want to keep it just in case somebody wants me to attach it to Blackboard or something, so I don't want to just get rid of it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it in a region, and making it in a region makes it collapsible. So wherever you want to start your region, you can put a hashtag, and you can see your cursor kind of moves over to the right side of the screen. And then you can type in the name region. And then after that, you can put in a little, like a comment of what you want this region to be called. I'm going to say loops. And then wherever you want to end your region, you can hit enter, and then put another hashtag end region. Just like that. And now it's collapsible. If I go up to my region, I can collapse it. So now all of my loop stuff is still here, but I don't need to look at it all the time. Okay, that being said, so we go through. What I actually want to do is copy my for loop that calculates my future value. So let me go and copy that, because I want to continue to calculate my future value. So let's go here, and let's uncomment this. Guess I should have looked at the uncomment shortcut. Control KC, Control KU. That makes sense. Comment, uncomment. Okay. Go back in, Control K, Control U. I'm going to uncomment that. So now we're still calculating the future value. What I want to do is I want to send this to a method that calculates the future value for me. That way I can call it over and over again if I need it somewhere else in my program. So what I can do is I can highlight everything that I want to send to a method, and then I can press Control period. And it gives me a little helper over here that says extract method. It's saying, do you want to turn this into a method? I'm going to click yes. And now it gives me a rename. I can include comments, strings, preview, change. I'm just going to go ahead and in the method I'm going to say calculate future value. I'm going to click apply, and you can see that it already knows what it needs, and it did the rest of it for us. It knew that the future value was a decimal, and it knew that it needed monthly investment, monthly interest rate, and the number of months to calculate it. So now if we go down here, here's the method that was made. It was private since it's we're only going to need this in our form. We don't need anything else to call it. Since it's private, I'm going to get rid of the static keyword. There's no need for static. It returns a decimal. Since it returns the future value after it's been calculated. And here is all of the parameters that it needs. And then it does the calculation and returns the future value once it's finished. Another thing we could do if we wanted to keep this here was instead of decimal future value, I want to put future value there. I want to say calculate future value. I'm going to make this void. Okay, so what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to force my future value, which is a decimal, it's a value type. I'm trying to force it to be a reference type. That way I don't need to return it. I can just simply call it as long as it exists. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass it here, or at least know that it requires this future value reference. And then from here I'm going to allow a reference to my future value. That's a decimal. And now I no longer need a return. So I can say I'm going to send it a reference to my future value variable that it sees right here. If I'm highlighting it, and my IDE is showing me that it exists right here. And then I'm sending it as a parameter or a reference to my future value decimal, and that I calculate it, and then it refers to it here and sets it. So this knows that it's a reference to this. Other things you can do with parameters, if you can pass parameters explicitly. So if I commented this out, just to show you, if I call my calculate future value method, and I have an open parenthesis, you can see that it shows me exactly what this method takes in. It shows me the 4 parameters that it takes. So I already have them, but I could say monthly investment colon monthly investment. So you can pass parameters explicitly. So this is saying I want to pass into the monthly investment parameter the monthly investment. Now it's not imperative you do this. You don't have to. It's all how you code. But you could pass it explicitly like this. But it's not necessary if you simply pass it in order like we did at the top. But you can pass parameters explicitly. I want to go ahead and get rid of this and uncomment this. And another thing we can do is we can have parameters that have a default value. So here's the number of months. So I want to set the number of months equal to 12 here. But it's not going to like that because I have this reference to future values. So let's go ahead and put this last. If you have a default parameter, which we'll get to in a second here, the only requirement is your parameter must come last in the list that has a default value. So I went ahead and made it last in the list. And now if I take off the number of months, I don't get an error because my number of months has a default value. So now I can choose whether or not I want to pass it. So for example, if I pass the number of months, it still accepts it. So let's say my number of months here is 12. So how do I want to do this? I can say my number of months is my years times 12, so that's like 5 times 12, which is 60 if it was 5 years. So I can go ahead and say if number of months is not equal to string.empty empty. It's not going to like that because it's parsing it. Let's say if the user puts in a number of months that is less than 12, we'll just use 12. So you have to do at least 12 months to use this investment. So let's say if my number of months is less than 12, then I want to use this calculate future value method. Right? No, I want to use this one. So I want to use the 12 if they don't put in enough months. So if they put in maybe less than a year, no, it'd have to be number of years. If number of years is less than 1, so maybe they put in half a year or something. Number of years less than 1. Then I want to use that calculate method. Otherwise, I want to use this calculate method, passing the number of months. What doesn't it like about this? Let's take off the if. It probably doesn't like me using that as a ternary. Let's do it this way. If the number of years is less than 1, let's take off the ternary. Let's do an if statement. We're going to call this one. Otherwise, we're going to call this one. So you can see that we didn't copy and paste the method with another parameter list. We have our default parameter here. So we can pass it with or without the number of months. We can pass parameters explicitly. Okay, so that about wraps up what I wanted to talk about refactoring methods, a little bit about regions, default parameters, and passing parameters explicitly. What I'd like to go over now is talking a little bit about events and event handlers and how you can set those up in even in the properties window if you'd like. So we're going to put a feature on our application that whenever the user starts typing in something into the monthly investment or yearly interest rate or number of years, any of those text boxes, whenever the text changes in it, I want to clear out that future value since the future value is no longer valid. So I'm going to go ahead and make a method down here that clears out my future value for me. It's not going to return anything. All it's going to do is just clear out my future value, and I'm going to call it clear future value. It's not going to take any parameters. Actually, it is going to take parameters because it's going to be an event handler. So remember when I was talking about delegates, because the delegate for the event handler looks like this, it requires these two parameters. So when we talk more about delegates, that'll make a bit more sense. Until then, whenever you have an event handler, it must look like this. It must have these two parameters. So now I can say txt result, which is my future value, dot text equals string dot empty. So I'm just essentially setting the text to an empty string whenever that happens. So if you go back to your design window and you click on one of your components, you can go to your events properties and notice that it has this text changed event, so it tries to help you out a little bit, and it says this is the most common event people use, and in this case they're right, this is the one we want. So you can hit your drop down and it should show you all of the methods that are on your form you can call. And sure enough, here's our clear future value event handler that we want to invoke whenever a text is changed on that text box. And let's go ahead and add that same event to the other two text boxes as well. So here's a clear future value. I'll click save. And again, clear future value. And save. So if you notice, what that does is if we go back to this screen, we can go to initialize components. It actually generates that code for us for that event handler. So you notice that our text monthly investment text box, the text changed event, notice when you hover over it, it has this little lightning bolt. So we know that this is an event handler. And it's going to, you can see this plus equals syntax, which kind of looks like you're adding something. Well, in this case, it's called subscribing, so you're subscribing to this event. And what's subscribing to it? Well, it's this new event handler. That's this method. So this is a little bit different because this is a method. You're putting a method as a parameter, so that's kind of weird. So this actually points a little bit to functional programming that C# has tried to implement in recent years. So it tries to make our programming a little bit more functional. So this is saying an event handler, and it passes this method into it. So whenever the text changes in any of these text boxes, we want this method to fire. And remember, in our case, that method was to clear the text property in our future values total. So let's make sure that works. Let's go ahead and start the application. And let's try to calculate our monthly investment again. Click calculate, and again there's our 78,082. And now if I click in here and I start changing any text, this should clear out when I do something. And sure enough, there it goes. So if I make another investment and I change it, it should clear this out. And again, it does. Let's make sure it does it for our other text boxes. I want to change the number of years to 55, and it changes that again. So that's a way you can make event handlers, and you can subscribe to those events in your view back here in your components. You can do it with your buttons, with your text boxes. Any component that has events on it, you can subscribe to them here in your properties window.